perhaps a dozen feet thick in the middle, feathered toward the edges into a perfectly round, smooth leading edge. The three massive struts upon which it sat jutted from the belly. On the bottom of the struts were pads, not wheels. Protruding from the saucer's edge, covering an area of about 15 degrees of its circumference, were 4 rocket nozzles, each perhaps 15 inches in diameter. The landing gear struts and rocket nozzles were the only imperfections in the perfect oval shape that Newton could see from his vantage point. "It's German, no doubt about it," one of the scientists insisted. "The government is trying to keep it under wraps. They don't want Uncle Joe Stalin to hear about it." Newton thought that hypothesis highly unlikely, but he held his tongue. The German rockets that he had spent the last 6 months examining were much cruder in appearance than this sleek, ominous, perfectly round black shape. Neither Soviet nor German industry was capable of manufacturing anything like this, nor was American industry, or any industrial establishment on the planet. On this planet. The saucer wasn't from this planet. That realization crystallized in Newton's mind. But if it wasn't made on Earth, then where? It must have been flown here. By whom? "An opportunity of a lifetime," the senior man was saying. He rubbed his hands in excited anticipation. No one responded to that. The rest of the members of the group stood mesmerized as the crane lifted the saucer onto the massive lowboy. It took 10 minutes to strap it down, 10 long minutes of absolute silence among the watching scientists, each of whom was lost in his own thoughts. Finally, when the saucer was secured, the lowboy and a convoy of army trucks full of armed soldiers crept away from the lights into the darkness of the desert night. When the remaining soldiers had dispersed and the small knot of scientists stood alone beside the motionless train, the senior man again broke the silence. "Washington wants an encrypted report of our preliminary examination by tomorrow evening. The interest is at the very highest level. We'll start at 7 in the morning." A few people muttered replies, but Newton Chadwick didn't. He was staring into the night that had swallowed the saucer. He couldn't sleep that night. The Army installed the wizards in a large tent and issued each of them a cot and a sleeping bag. Lying on his cot in the darkness, his nostrils full of the sage and juniper scent of the high desert, he lay listening to the whisper of the wind, thinking about the saucer. The existence of the saucer required each person who saw it to throw out the preconceptions of a lifetime. Somewhere out there in the vast nothingness of space, somewhere far away in space and time, for Chadwick well knew the two were inexplicably linked, which was one of the great mysteries of life, there were other intelligent creatures. They had built this saucer, and now it was here, on Earth, on this small planet, orbiting a nondescript star on the edge of a humongous galaxy that wheeled endlessly on a hidden axis in the infinite void. Newton Chadwick was a child of his place and time, and he didn't know what to make of it. Sure, he had read his share of science fiction as a youngster, and that was precisely what it was, fiction. He had seen the Buck Rogers matinee features, watched space cowboys shoot it out with aliens bent on conquest, or worse, mind candy for a Saturday afternoon. The saucer changed everything. Everything. The other men on cots weren't sleeping either. They coughed and tossed restlessly, but no one was breathing deeply or snoring. Physicists, mathematicians, working engineers, they were from the nation's finest universities and large industrial concerns. No doubt they were also wondering what they would find when they opened the saucer in the morning. And because they were human, thinking about how the discoveries they would make would build careers and reputations. Finally, when he could stand it no longer, Chadwick eased from his sleeping bag, stepped into his clothes and shoes, and slipped out of the tent. The night sky was full of stars, countless points of light flung carelessly into the inky blackness by God? Young Chadwick had never thought much about God. He had been dipped in religion as a child when his father and mother dragged him to church at irregular intervals, but little of it had stuck. Tonight, staring upward at the gleaming stars in the obsidian sky, he realized that if there were a God, he was a whale of a lot larger than the white-haired old man depicted on the stained-glass windows of that church in New Jersey. And there was the Milky Way, a ribbon of light that stretched from horizon to horizon, a galaxy of countless stars. For the first time in his life, Newton Chadwick felt as if he were marooned on a small island in an endless sea, confined to a tiny spit of sand, unable to escape. One of the wizards was a slim older man with wispy white hair surrounding a tanned, bald pate who habitually sucked on a pipe. He was the gloomiest of the lot the following morning, saying little in response to the excited inanities and speculations of his colleagues as they ate a hasty breakfast in an army mess tent. He ate in silence as they discussed the possibility that one of the creatures who had flown the saucer might still be in it. Did the Army open the thing? No one knew. Finally, someone drew him into the conversation with a direct question. "I wish I weren't involved in this," he said gloomily. "I wish I were back in my lab at the university, happily ignorant of the existence of that thing." He jerked his head in the direction of the hangar that held the saucer. "What are you saying, Fred? The arrival of the saucer is the most exciting thing to happen on this planet since Christ rose from the dead." "As I recall, the news of the resurrection made a great many people very unhappy," Fred responded. "The saucer story will be greeted the same way. Who do you think is going to be overjoyed at the news? The clergy? Industrialists? Union leaders? The politicians? When they pause for a moment's thought, and I'll freely admit that they rarely exercise their brains for that long, the politicians are going to realize that the arrival of a spaceship flown by intelligent creatures from another solar system is going to rock civilization, may even shatter it. Anarchy? Are you predicting anarchy?" Fred toyed with the remnants of his breakfast. "A man my age should probably stay out of the business of crystal ball predictions. However, I do think our report is going to give official Washington one hell of a scare. My gut feeling is we're wasting our time. We'll never be allowed to say a word about anything we see or do here today, and yet no one here will ever be able to forget it. We'd all be better off not knowing." The discussion swirled around the table, but Newton Chadwick didn't participate. He rarely did. The senior men had careers, tenured faculty chairs, and hard-earned reputations to worry about. He didn't. Newton forked eggs and potatoes, drained a second glass of milk, and left the tent while they pondered the shape of the world in the coming age of the saucer. The saucer was parked in a large hangar at an unused airbase in the desert wastes. The wizards rode for an hour on the bus to get there. One of the officers handed out a special badge to each man, who was required to wear it on a chain around his neck, as if it were a set of dog tags. They were all in such a hurry to see the saucer again that they donned the tags without protest and queued up to get past another soldier, a sergeant, who scrutinized each badge, even though he had just watched the officer hand them out and the wizards put them on. As usual, Chadwick found himself at the end of the line. He ground his teeth and waited his turn. There it was, sitting under the lights on its legs, apparently undamaged by the rough handling it had recently received. They found the entry hatch on the belly of the saucer quickly enough. As the rest of the group fondled the machine and examined the rocket nozzles and tried to see through the canopy into the dark interior, 3 of them worked on getting the hatch open. 20 minutes later, they were still at it. They would have spent the day staring at the mechanism if one of them had not kept his hand on it for about 10 seconds, then tried to manipulate it. Now it opened. "It's sensitive to heat," they cried to their colleagues as they gathered on hands and knees under the saucer to examine the mechanism. As they excitedly discussed how this minor miracle might be physically accomplished, Newton Chadwick wriggled between them and slithered up through the hatch. The interior was dark, lit only by the overhead lights from the interior of the hangar that penetrated the canopy, and it was empty of the creatures, living or dead, who had flown the saucer. A much relieved Newton Chadwick began a hasty inspection. There were seats equipped with seat belts. Humans, Chadwick concluded, or humanoids, human-like creatures.